Thank you very much for attending this talk. I'm here for actually two reasons. I'm here because Nosh invited me here, and no one can ever say no to Nosh. That's lesson number one. But secondly, I'm here in Chicago because 50 years ago, my father completed his PhD in physical chemistry at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and my sisters and I decided to celebrate with him this weekend. So this is actually a tremendous occasion for my family, and we're all having a very good time in Chicago, and it's a lovely day. You can't tell here, but we've been having a very good time. So it's I'm in a good place right now. But for another reason, I'm in a bad place. As you may have been following in the news, my current employer, the University of Virginia, is in a bit of turmoil. My president, someone I've known for more than 20 years because she was the graduate dean at the University of Texas, an outstanding sociologist named Terry Sullivan, has been president of the University of Virginia for 2 years. Suddenly, without warning, without consultation, without explanation, she was informed by the rector, who is the leader of the chair of the Board of Governors, which is what most universities call their Board of Regents, informed her that she had the votes to fire her, right? That the rector had the votes to fire the president. And this was about, almost 2 weeks ago now. The president, believing that, resigned. Quickly, a 3-member executive committee of the board accepted the resignation. And this started tremendous turmoil in my professional life, in the life of the very small town in which I live, because, of course, the University of Virginia is more than the major employer. It is almost everything about Charlottesville, Virginia. It immediately started a firestorm among alums, among students, and among faculty. And I've been deeply and directly engaged in the movement to push back against that decision and reinstall President Sullivan, whom we all deeply respect. So that's where the last 2 weeks of my life have been, which has left me unable to focus on this presentation with the detail to which I like to hold myself to. And so let me apologize in advance for being a bit distracted. This has been a very difficult time. Now, these two things, the thing that's making me very happy, that my father came here 50 years ago, actually arrived in Chicago in 1956. I think he might have been the second Indian guy in Chicago in 1956. There are more now. And that he finished his PhD 50 years ago. And now that I've gone through this turmoil, that not only raises important questions about the future of the University of Virginia. People not affiliated with the University of Virginia probably shouldn't care about that. But it actually strikes at the heart of the future of public higher education in the United States. Because what seems to be the motive behind this sudden and radical change in leadership is a deep impatience with scholarship, impatience with the academic orientation toward the world. The members of the board who overthrew the president seem to have been motivated by a sense that there's a crisis in American academia, a crisis that American academia must solve internally, apparently, even though it was certainly not caused internally. And that crisis can only be solved by driving content to the web in a rapid fashion. Driving content to the web in a rapid fashion. And because the president of my university said very bluntly, it's not that simple, what any responsible academic would say when confronted with an ideological push to do anything quite so expansive. You know, she basically pointed out, it's not as cheap as you may think, it's not as effective as you may think. There are all sorts of problems with its execution. She also added that there's a lot of experimentation going on in that field at the University of Virginia. That was not an unsatisfying answer. In other words, the very orientation that all of us take toward the world, the orientation of being patient, deliberate, waiting for evidence before we make a decision, testing hypotheses, None of that mattered to the people who ran this university because things had to change fast. Things had to change fast because there's another ideology at work, and that is the ideology of creative destruction, right? An ideology that flows from and through, well, let's be frank, schools like this, business schools. And so we actually have a pretty strong clash of cultures working among the powerful at the University of Virginia. You could boil it down to the vision of the world of the MBA versus the vision of the world of the PhD. And the PhD seem to have lost. And that's disturbing in a lot of ways. So as you can tell, that's where my mind has been. But of course, lurking in all of this has been the notion of the web, right? So the members of the board who were convinced that President Sullivan should be fired, one of their prime motivations was that she had not embraced the web as the prime medium, vehicle for the distribution of course content. And I refuse to say online education, because to me, there's a big difference between the distribution of course content and education. I would probably be fired by the Board of Visitors as well, had they the opportunity. So that turmoil is not distinct from the subject that I have long planned to discuss here. Now, I'm not a web scientist, right? I said I can't say no to Nosh. Nobody can say no to Nosh. But the fact is, when he invited me to address this body, a conference devoted to scientific analysis, the refreshingly multidisciplinary scientific analysis of web activities and culture, I was flattered, but I had serious misgivings because, you heard, I have a PhD in American Studies. That's the undisciplined, right? I am thoroughly undisciplined. So what do I have to say to web scientists about web science? Well, the fact is, my contribution to, if it counts at all, my contribution to our understanding of the current state of digital media, digital activities in the world, is much closer to one who studies theology. You could say I'm a scholar of the theology of the web, rather than a web scientist. I pay a lot of attention to how people discuss the web, especially in public forums, especially in mass market publications. I'm fascinated by the ways in which certain aspects and assumptions about the web and the internet become articles of faith, become givens, become naturalized. And that's why I chose this particular cover of Wired Magazine, because Wired Magazine is a theological document, if there ever was one, right? It is all about the deep belief in the transformative, radically transformative power of digital technology. And of course, it has risen in importance in people's minds and lives as first the internet and then the web rose in importance in our lives. And so it is sort of, deeply invested in making sure that all things digital are really cool and worthy of analysis. Now, Chris Anderson, its longtime editor, is glib, is sharp, is educated, is a talented writer, although not often very careful, and he has this wonderful talent for starting an argument. And he does this through the old technique of hyperbole, right? So this phrase, "the web is dead," that couldn't help but start a flurry of reactions that pretty much went, "No, it's not," and pretty much ended with, "No, it's not." And the evidence was, well, look at all the stuff we do on the web. And that was really Anderson's argument when he wrote that the web is dead. Now, of course, one of the things we see when we look at the theology of the web, or the theology of digital technology, or the theology of technology in the past 20 years, is that things are constantly being declared dead, even when they don't actually die, right? Remember that the music business is dead, except it's not. Remember that the personal computer is dead, except it's not. The web is dead, except it's not. Right? The radio should be dead. Video should have killed the radio star. It didn't happen. Nothing actually dies. McLuhan told us this, but we can't seem to get this phrase out of our minds. We can't stop being tempted by the strong declaration, right? As if because to make a proclamation like this, the web is dead, is to stake out some ground and to coin a phrase that one will be credited with for at least the following 8 or 9 days in which it's discussed. So this came out in 2010, and I think everybody involved would be surprised that I'm talking about it in 2012. But I'm talking about it in 2012 because I actually think that while the article, which was remarkably short, missed the point, it scratched at something important. So the article itself, as I said, came out in 2010, and this is sort of its lead graph. And in this graph, the article, through this graph, the article tried to make the point that what we think of as web use has been steadily declining as a percentage of basically internet bandwidth, right? And you could see that at some point peer-to-peer was so incredibly dominant, dropping off, still significant, but dropping off as other opportunities come clear. I'm not sure what distinguishes web and video, except the video must be Netflix streaming type uses. And obviously that's growing because it wasn't possible before, and now it is. So is this graph an actual good reflection? This is a graph based on percentage, right? If we actually, instead, we're talking about total use of bandwidth, perhaps you don't worry about those fractions changing. Perhaps the curve of web use continues to go up, or at least stays flat, and it just grows much more in the video area. I don't know. We don't have that evidence here. But of course, this is the graph that supports the contention that Anderson was trying to make. And Anderson, of course, made one of these glib charts that is reminiscent of the what is Web 2.0 chart that you all saw, everybody saw in 2003 or 2002, I don't remember exactly, when that phrase first hit us, where Web 1.0 has the following applications and driving personalities and uses, et cetera, and then Web 2.0 has a different set, right? And so, basically he was trying to sort of chart out who the winners and losers are. Always funny to, see Jerry Yang in the then column. He poor guy, always seems stuck in the then. But nonetheless, this is the sort of simplistic juxtaposition that publications such as Wired like to focus on. Now, basically, the article argued that because we use apps increasingly for our digital media uses, needs, right? Because we are shifting to devices that are much more closed, much less customizable, much less engaged in the open web / open internet, then we have a lot to worry about. Or actually, Anderson wasn't so worried. He saw great virtue in the shift to an app ecosystem, an app environment, rather than the open web environment. And he was careful to say that in the article anyway, that he didn't think that we would not have a web. But he was trying to make the point that for all of the really important things that people use and where the investment money is going to go in the near future, it was much more likely to be app-based through fairly controlled mobile devices rather than through these open and customizable boxes and a radically free network. It's not a controversial position phrased that way. Stick the web is dead on top of it, and all of a sudden the blogosphere fills up and the Twitter sphere fills up with all sorts of what the heck are you talking about, right? Responses, which is why I thought it was a missed opportunity. And when it came out, that was my first thought. Anderson could have actually gone to an interesting place. He could have gone to an interesting place because he could have talked about how we think about digital media in our lives and how we talk about it, how we write about it, what we assume about it. Because now, in 2012, we're talking about roughly 20 years of the use of the web in our lives. And some of us have been with it for 20 years. Some of us got on the train 15 years ago or 10 years ago. Nonetheless, it's been a very, very short time that the web has been in our lives. And 40 years since the internet showed up as a phenomenon, even if we didn't call it that at the beginning. So we're talking about a 40-year period and a 20-year period. Very small slivers of human activity on Earth. And yet, we spend so much of our time and energy and money trying to figure out what the heck's going on. This entire conference is based on trying to get a sense of what just happened over the last 20 years and what might happen over the next 20 years. So what I want to do in this presentation is read this article, "The Web is Dead," up against the sort of founding document of this conference, right? The Berners-Lee et al. Article, A Framework for Web Science from 2006. And this phrase, I think, was one of the more salient ones, one of the more interesting and important ones in that article. And the article's full of important claims and predictions and requests, right? It's a manifesto of sorts of the ways to study the web. This article, of course, is terrifically influential. It's also oddly normative in the way that it makes a policy claim. It makes a set of claims that we have to defend certain things about the openness of the web in order to have the web, right? So, but I'm stuck on this phrase, neither the web nor the world is static. And that's, it seems like a given. This appears actually on page 1 of the article. And so it's easy to breeze by it in your excitement to get to the meat of the article. But let's stop and reflect on this. Neither the web nor the world is static. Now, neither the web nor the world is permanent either. That's a basic tenet of theology and physics as well, right? So that's one thing we have to understand. One of the things that concerns me is the naturalization of the web, or the assumption that the web is somehow with us, because perhaps it's always been, right? But we know it hasn't been. We know it's a product of a very particular set of historical accidents. Right? We had, if you look back at how we got here and how we got a World Wide Web, it would be almost impossible to imagine setting that plot in motion, designing that sort of project from the top down. You had to have a set of actors, a pretty broad set of actors, led by a handful of very bold scientists who were operating in a highly protected environment, an environment that encouraged experimentation, an environment that did not punish one for failure, did not punish one for lack of productivity, right? I mean, think about what Tim Berners-Lee was doing at CERN. He was not working on, at least in a central way, working on a set of papers about particle physics, right? That's what a lot of the people at CERN do, but surprisingly, of course, and fortunately for the rest of the world as well, that's actually not what he was doing. He was working on an information organizational challenge. That is because, of course, we found as a society that it was good to allow people that level of play. In 2012, he might not have that luxury. See how I'm like folding back into the political economy of higher education or political economy of academia, right? In 1920, he might not have had that luxury either, right? Of course, it would have been kind of a silly thing to imagine to do in 1920, although H.G. Wells came close. Nonetheless, that happened at that time, right? Tim Berners-Lee had the right set of influences. He had the right set of tools in front of him. He had the opportunity to imagine this project. He had a series of steps that he took to develop this vocabulary as well as some basic code to make all this happen. He had the social network to be able to actually make it matter to other people. He had the vision to articulate what it could be, pretty unique set of circumstances. And it also happened at a time when there was this thing, the internet, that not a lot of people knew about and very few people had invested in as a commercial activity. In fact, I'm pretty sure nobody had at that point, because what the heck could you do to make money on this thing, right? It was not about that. It was about a space to experiment, a space to play, a space to fail, but it was also about the fundamental sort of practical ability to send data across long distances and encourage collaboration with some what we now see are pretty rudimentary tools. And so because we had these substrates, these environments, we had CERN, we had the internet, and we had them meet in the person of Tim Berners-Lee, and of course he was not alone, just representing a whole collection of people who were adding to this project. We were able to see the creation of and rapid distribution of an environment that, I'm always sort of careful when I talk about sort of world historical terms, but pretty revolutionary environment, one in which people with almost no skill can distribute their words, their images, their sounds in digital form to millions or billions of people with at no marginal cost. That had never happened in human history before. And the imagination that unleashed, we're still trying to wrap our heads around. So that was a set of historical accidents, right? It wasn't meant to be. No one 10 years earlier thought it could be under those terms, although certainly Berners-Lee and several other people imagined different versions of it. He was not the first person to imagine this sort of collection of organizable interlinked documents that might enhance the interrelationship of knowledge. But we had a very weird meeting of environments, of minds, et cetera. Now, 20 years later, we have Amazon, we have online dating, we have Facebook, and we have all of these new walled gardens, right? These sort of walled communities building up in sort of web-based environments that aren't quite the web, right? They aren't quite open. But we also have this shift to the mobile environment. Is that all that's happening? Is that a pretty simple shift? Because that's how this article by Anderson sort of explains it. That the shift from the computer and the open web to the mobile device and the app is revolutionary enough to declare the World Wide Web dead. Well, I think there's actually something else going on. I think there's something much broader going on. But we have to reflect on the fact that for the last 20 years, we've been scrambling to try to make sense of this. One thing I'd like to think through as a thought experiment is that perhaps there never really was the internet, capital T, capital I. Perhaps there never really was the web, capital T, capital W. And I think this is really important because when we talk about these things in universal terms, we forget that until very recently, the notion that a significant portion of the world can actually engage with these platforms and these technologies was simply absurd, right? We were talking about a fairly small part of the world that was able to engage with these sorts of platforms and technologies. That's sort of a given. We paid more attention to it before. But now we're in a moment where the real growth of the distribution and use of digital technologies is, of course, happening through handheld devices. And handheld devices don't jump quickly into the TCP/IP world. They certainly don't use the HTML world, the HTML environment quite so often or easily, right? They are, in fact, the very thing that Anderson's pointing out in this. The growth area in the world worldwide for digital technologies is, of course, in a much more controlled environment, and it's happening over proprietary networks, generally mobile. And what's happening is not, of course, the sort of iPhone full of apps that we're used to. It's much more often some rudimentary uses, SMS, for instance, the use of a Nokia phone as a simple calculator. Those are the sorts of engagements and technologies that are probably having the most profound daily difference in people's daily lives. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But just in terms of the web, there has not been the web if you consider the fact that a significant portion of the world that interacts with a web browser is not experiencing the same set of documents, the same set of information along the same lines as we do. They're using different search engines. They're living under different regimes of filtering and censorship. And it's not just China, and it's not just Burma and Cuba, but we're talking about Turkey and India, two democracies with relatively free presses that have pretty strong internet filtering policies, and that is a significant slice of humanity. And so what we experience when we engage with these platforms is nothing like what somebody is experiencing in Hyderabad, or nothing like what somebody is experiencing in Istanbul. And that's important to remember. The other thing to remember is because we use search engines to experience the web, and search engines are increasingly personalized and localized, my experience of the web may not look or feel anything like your experience of the web. What does that do to web science, right? If first of all, the algorithms of search engines are changing constantly. Secondly, what is allowed to get through to users at different parts of the world is changing constantly. And thirdly, the entire environment is changing constantly, right? Pages are going up, pages are going down, growing at a rapid rate. If there's nothing but flux in this environment, how can any observation be replicable? How can any observation carry through to be important 5 or 10 years after a study is done? These are the sorts of problems that have been bugging me for a long time, which is why the notion of one single web, the web, just doesn't ring true to me. The notion of the internet also doesn't ring true to me. Policy differences are so significant, even between the US and Canada, that I think we must pay much more attention to the differences, which makes it a lot harder to do scientific investigation of this phenomenon. Because increasingly we're talking about smaller and smaller sets of users who experience phenomena in the same way. Neither the web nor the world is static. And I'm not even sure there is a web. In fact, I'm sure there's not a web. Now, this foundational article, Berners-Lee et al., as I said, made a series of normative prescriptions. It argued that we really have to be custodians of this space, custodians of the web, in order to ensure that all of this creativity at the endpoints could continue. And I think that that's one of the more important things that we have to remember in this project. The project is not merely to make sense of what people are doing and how people are using these platforms, but in fact, to be constantly aware of the fact that they may not be here forever, that they just got here, that they could change radically, and that there are all sorts of interests at work trying to rein in what people do in these environments. So I think a lot about these actors. I think a lot about Google, Apple, and Facebook, and I would add Microsoft to this list. And I'm constantly trying to figure out what they're up to. And I'm never satisfied with the way that Wired presents it, right? It's not just about going mobile or going social. To me, that seems to miss the long-term point. Because in 5 years, are we going to use phrases like going mobile or going social? Will both of those things be such a given that we won't even talk about the moment when Google failed to go social or Microsoft failed to go mobile? How are these companies trying to relate to us, and how are we relating to them? And what is going on ecologically here? In another Wired article from a few years back, from 2009, I believe, Anderson basically declared the scientific method over. He didn't say science is dead, but he made a claim almost as strong. in which he said, look, the era of big data allows us to toss out this creaky old notion of assuming a hypothesis and then falsifying it and testing it. That's so 18th century. We don't have to do that anymore. We can just do massive analyses of trends. We can essentially figure out patterns and assume truth from those patterns if we have data sets big enough. Again, yeah, pretty amazing. A lot of people have been up to that project for about 20 years now, as we've been able to gather bigger and bigger data sets. It is not an intellectual revolution necessarily, but it's a whole lot of really powerful tools at people's disposal. It doesn't at all crush the old way of doing science. If anything, it enhances it. If anything, it works in partnership with the old way of doing science, but of course, Anderson can't write it that way. Instead, Anderson basically declared the old way of doing science too slow, the notion of deliberation, the notion of testing hypotheses, quaint, right? But instead, the notion of mining big sets of data, the way Google does, as the way of the future and therefore the winner, right? That article didn't cause quite the uproar in the blogosphere that The Web is Dead did, but nonetheless, I think it was a similar sort of attempt to take something really fascinating and crush it with simplicity. And that's exactly what happened there. So what is happening? How do we want to make sense of what's going on with the ecosystem that these companies are playing around in? Well, over the past few years, we've seen a number of authors come up with theories of the web or theories of our current technological moment. And of course, they try to give us vocabulary, guidance, and ultimately policy prescriptions as well. We've seen Yochai Benkler write in his book, The Wealth of Networks, that the network economy is a new phase in human history, one in which the connectivity, the power of people to connect over long distances and collaborate without motivation that is purely greed-based, has unleashed a tremendous power. And it has the ability to create a sort of post-industrial moment in which we can make and build amazing things without having to crush each other, right? So that's why he called it the wealth of networks, sort of riffing on the wealth of nations. He could have, I guess, called it the .communist manifesto, but he didn't mean that at all. He wanted to talk about how this is a very different state of affairs, and it's an amazing book, and it's some tremendous intellectual heavy lifting. It has some pretty hardcore economic theory in there. It has some stirring insights about the role of technology. It's tremendously optimistic ultimately, because he thinks that the unleashing of all these human forces through the collaboration over open networks is ultimately going to make the world better. And it's very technologically deterministic. He's convinced that the very presence of these networks will guide history in this particular direction. Clay Shirky, who isn't quite the technological determinist Benkler is, wrote in Cognitive Surplus, that in his book Cognitive Surplus, that this notion of open connectivity and collaboration has given rise to the ability to build huge edifices and astounding structures, and that now we're in this moment where we don't have to waste so much of our brain power watching television because we can now team up with each other to do really cool things for hours at a time. And in fact, all of us have to just put in a few minutes a day, and if enough of us do, we can build amazing structures. In both cases, Benkler and Shirky invoke two cases to make their point of major historical change. Those two cases are free and open source software and Wikipedia. Every other book that makes a claim about this ability for human beings to relate to each other in this revolutionary new way invoke two cases, free and open source software and Wikipedia. I'm waiting for the third. I don't doubt their claims necessarily. I'm just waiting for the third case. 3 cases don't actually seal the deal, but it is suspicious that it never seems to go past free and open source software and Wikipedia. Jonathan Zittrain invokes both of these as well in his book, The Future of the Internet. Jonathan Zittrain is worried, though. Unlike Benkler, he doesn't assume that the status quo will be with us forever, right? He doesn't assume that we're always going to have these sort of open spaces for play. In fact, his work was sort of the foundation of this article, The Web is Dead, because in his book, The Future of the Internet, he made the case early on, actually sort of pre-iPhone, that the move to more sealed boxes, more controlled application environments would have the effect of, well, one positive effect, limiting malware pretty severely, because now companies like Apple and companies like Google or even AT&T can filter for malware. And it would also have the effect of limiting the very democratized sense of tool building that we'd enjoyed on the open web and the open internet. And so he worried about this, what he called the generative culture. So there, when confronted with the notion of how to preserve generative culture, he reverted to these same 2 cases, free and open source software and Wikipedia, and the energy unleashed by those, and the power that those have in the imagination. And at one point I had to ask him, maybe Wikipedia is a one-off. Maybe Wikipedia is the thing we can do, and we may not have another thing in us. And he's thoroughly willing to entertain that possibility. And that's one thing I still wonder about. So basically, what you have is you have Benkler and you have Shirky writing really brilliant observations about what's going on in the world, but taking the free and open internet and the free and open web as given, right? As sort of the substrates on which the world is working right now, or the soil in which we're growing so many amazing things. But then you also have people like Lawrence Lessig, at least in his first book, Code, Jonathan Zittrain, Tim Wu in The Master Switch, who are bringing in the notion that things could go very badly in these environments if we're not careful, if we don't defend the things we approve of, if we don't defend the values embedded in these technologies, if we don't defend them politically, legislatively, and legally, we could be in some big trouble. We can't just take it for granted that the internet will be open and free, that the web will be open and free. We actually have to do something about it. And so in this collection of works, the major theorists about the web actually have a pretty interesting difference in how they view the necessity of the current environment. So when I look at what these companies are doing, and I sort of work them through all the different web theories that we've heard about in the last few years, it occurs to me that they're not just worried about shifting to mobile, shifting to social, right? That's the short game. You write about that, you're doing sports writing. What fascinates me about these 3 companies plus Microsoft is the notion that what they're really trying to do is be the custodians or the managers or the pipelines of data that flows through our lives in various fashions, right? I think they figured out that they no longer care about this box as the end of the story, or this box, or your phone, right? It's not, if we even call it a phone. It's not about the box anymore, and it's not about what the next box is going to be. It's more about the fact that increasingly they see an opportunity to run bits through our lives and show us the return on that, right? The reward for that. That at some point we're going to be presented with the notion that the fridge that has feedback built into it and the ability to monitor the level of milk will present us with a better life, a fuller life than the fridge that does not, right? And so it'll be about managing and monitoring the data flow that makes that possible. And so whether or not we're talking about a laptop computer, desktop computer, a tablet, what we now call a phone, whether the data is flowing through our glasses, whether the data is flowing through our automobiles, whether their data is flowing through the fridges, or whether the Xbox becomes the hub of our homes, right? It's really about mastering and monitoring those data flows. These companies are battling to be the operating systems of our lives, right? To be the operating system of our lives. They're hoping each one is hoping it will be the winner. And so that explains to me, because what I've been trying to figure out is why they choose to compete where they don't have to compete. Why is Microsoft spending so much money on search? That makes no sense. Why not give up on that, right? There's no extra money lying out there right now. All that Bing has managed to do is take users away from a direct Yahoo search. Bing's growing in users, but that's largely because the web is still growing in users. But it hasn't cut into Microsoft's usage, into Google's usage, but more importantly, it has not cut into Google's online advertising, which is really where the market is. Facebook has. So Facebook and Google are the closest thing to direct competitors because in a particular market, web advertising is the key. But what Facebook's doing in our lives and what Google's doing in our lives, they're still very different things. Why is Google even bothering with Google+? Right? Why? Why is Google still running Orkut? I mean, it seems like it need not play that game and it could still make a lot of money. So what's the motivation for going in there? Fear of losing? Well, you're already losing, right? Why is Microsoft still trying to do a mobile operating system with Nokia? I don't know if Nokia is going to be around in a year, but they're still trying that. Why is Facebook trying to encourage people to use its mobile app? That is where it loses money. If you use Facebook on the web, you're staring at ads. You're occasionally clicking on ads. You use Facebook on your mobile device, nothing. It's a huge money loser. And yet, Facebook is pushing the mobile platform constantly. Its marketing people are constantly thinking up ways to get people to go to the mobile app first when you pick up your phone, right? And that's baffling to me. So I've been trying for a couple of years, trying to figure out why they keep doing these things that seem to be money losers. And simple answer is most of these companies have more money than they know what to do with, so why not try it, right? The other guys might stumble, things could go badly, and they could own that territory. But I'm not sure that's quite it, right? Because you would think that these companies would double down on what they do really well. Now, there are a couple explanations for why they would not. One is that they all read Clay Christensen's books, right? So Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, which Bill Gates definitely read, tells the story of established incumbent companies that were doing so well that they yielded segments of the market that didn't present high rates of return and focused on segments of the market that generated high rates of return. So steel companies, for instance. Steel companies in the United States for many years focused on high-end steel, the sort of steel you would use in the fabrication of scientific instruments or in the more intricate elements of cars, actually all the elements of cars that use steel. But we're giving up on the low-end segments of steel, like the sort of cheap steel that you use in rebar to reinforce concrete, right? There's the marginal return for investing $1 in rebar production is pretty small compared to high-end steel, high-quality steel. So U.S. companies are like, why even spend those dollars over there? Let some other places produce that. So of course, after World War II, Japanese and German steel plants, which weren't really tooled well at that point for obvious reasons, to produce high-end steel right away, started out producing the low-end steel. And that was very helpful because not only those countries had to rebuild a lot of concrete first with rebar, but a lot of the places with which those countries traded needed that sort of material. So it was a growth market for them. And it was a great way to produce some kind of return. and let the US focus on the high end. Well, what Christensen noticed was, of course, that in the US, a lot of steel companies outside of Pittsburgh, for instance, were starting up at that low end as well, trying to take over that market. Over time, those companies got more efficient. The companies that were producing the cheaper steel, they figured out ways to produce the better steel with smaller plants with less labor, right? Because they were scrappier, smaller, they were able to innovate a little bit better. They were more desperate, right? They weren't making big profits, and so they weren't trying to defend the incumbent territory. And we all know how that ended. Ultimately, all of the big steel companies in this country had to go through reorganization, some pretty severe, painful reorganization in the 1980s. And we've yielded much of the world's steel market to Japan and Germany and now China and some other places. And we're seeing this over and over again. So Christensen tracked that sort of process through a number of different industries and concluded, again, a series of case studies, similar patterns of behavior. There's no big data in here, so all of this is suspect. That basically, if companies rest on their successes, focus on their areas of competence, they're able to win big in the short term, but in the long term, they're exposing themselves to insurgents. He didn't really have a crisp and clean answer for how to do this, but over time, he's consulted with a number of firms and basically encouraged them to set up parts of their operation that is sort of outside of this core corporate culture where they're allowed to ask hard questions and challenge, right? So maybe all these companies, leaders have read Innovator's Dilemma, I'm pretty sure they have, and they're just trying to make sure that they have all of their sides, all their flanks covered. So when we say Microsoft missed out on the web, well, yeah, it did at first, but it certainly caught up by crushing Netscape about as quickly as possible. And so that may be an example of that. But I think more importantly, we're talking about this notion of the operating system of your life. Now, what if I'm right? And these people never call me, so I don't know, right? I never get calls from the CEOs. Maybe I'm right. But let's assume that I'm right, that's ultimately the game here. That large data flows are going to go through more in different parts of our lives. They're going to energize our fridge. They're going to help monitor our lawn growth. Everything will have more efficient systems and lots of feedback built into it. All that sounds great, but ultimately they're going to figure out a way to meter it or capture our attention and meter it, right? Those are the only two ways to make money, either meter the service or meter our attention. And what sort of implications does that have to the good life? I mean, that is, of course, that's what Dana's going to talk about tomorrow. Let's put that aside. What the heck are we studying then? If that's actually the game. If the game's not to keep focusing on what people do on the web, per se, if the game's not to even care about the web, leave it behind. Who knows, in 10 years, maybe the web, as we know it today, contains a lot of porn, a lot of hate speech, and a lot of blogs by professors. What if we're left with that? That's a very different web. And Wikipedia, of course, let's not forget. That will always survive. And probably be just as resistant to new entries as it is today. But given that, what is the challenge to us as a set of scholars trying to make sense of this? What is our object of study? Do we want our object of study to be the web? Do we want our object of study to be the internet? If we have those choices, are we satisfied that we're studying one thing, one cohesive thing? Or do we need to pay attention to the fact that we're studying a very fractured set of things if you want to just take the internet or you just want to take the web? What if we choose to study the internet and not the web, which is sort of what Anderson argued, not about studying, but basically he says, the web is dead, long live the internet. Because his claim is this whole app universe is still an internet-based universe. I'm not convinced. I think AT&T and Orange and Deutsche Telekom are not at all interested in being internet companies. They're interested in metering the flow of data, and that's a very different set of concerns. And so, even this, we're not only talking about not necessarily a post-HTML environment, but an HTML environment that's a lot less vibrant than it is today. but perhaps a post-TCP IP environment in the sense that it's a lot less vibrant than it is today. None of these things going away necessarily, but becoming less central to the investment of time, money, and attention. So I think we really need to ask ourselves what our object of study should be, given the very real possibility that what's happening in the environment, often driven by these companies, whether we acknowledge it or not, is a lot different than we assume. So in other words, the internet is not a given. The web is not a given. They just got here. They might not be here very long. And we have to figure out a better way to make sense of rapid change. We're really good at tracking minute things happening in a very short period. We're not so good at weaving them together into the larger whole. And the people who have been trying to do that, people like Benkler and Shirky and Wu and Zittrain and Lessig, are trying their best to fumble through this, but it's increasingly hard for them as well. And so one of the reasons that a conference like this is so exciting is it gives us a chance to let people who do very different elements of study, trade techniques and trade observations. But one of the questions I would like to introduce to this this body is what if it's all over? What if we don't have? What if what we think of as the web is a lot less interesting in 10 years? So I'd like to end there on that wonderfully optimistic note. Right? Thank you very much for listening to me.